What would you do if your entire family ignored your existence until the one person outside the family said your name and suddenly everyone remembered? My name is Sierra Langford. I'm 33, and up until that night I was the black sheep, the ghost, the afterthought. But at my brother Camden's engagement dinner, something shifted. It started like every other Langford celebration: polished smiles, perfectly pressed napkins, and speeches that felt more like resumes. The restaurant was Blue Bridge, one of those glass and marble cathedrals downtown that whispered, "You made it." My parents loved appearances almost as much as they loved Camden. Camden, the chosen one, the Ivy League doctor, the golden son. Tonight was his night. Our parents were practically vibrating with pride. My father, Dr. Graham Langford, stood tall in his tailored suit, already rehearsing his toast. My mother, Eleanor, wore her signature pearls and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And me, I wore a fitted black dress. Clean lines, subtle power. Not flashy. Not screaming for attention. Just enough to remind myself I belonged here even if no one else remembered. I slipped into the seat next to a cousin who barely looked up from her phone. Across the table sat Camden's fiancée, Harper Carelli. I'd never met her before, but I knew who she was. The thing is, I'd seen her name 2 weeks earlier, on an email. As Director of Strategic Acquisitions for Horizon Health Tech, she'd reached out about a potential alignment of missions with my company. She didn't know who I was then, and I hadn't told anyone that she was trying to buy the very thing I'd built from nothing. Dinner began with toasts. My father recited Camden's CV like it was gospel. My mother cried at the memory of his first science fair. No one mentioned me. Then, midway through the risotto, something shifted. Harper tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly. "Langford," she said slowly. "Wait, your last name is Langford Camden." Chuckled fork mid-air. "Of course. She's my sister." But Harper didn't laugh. She blinked. Then quietly, carefully, she said, "You're not Sierra Langford of Madava." The room froze. My cousin's fork hovered in the air. My father's wineglass paused mid-sip. My mother blinked twice like a camera trying to refocus. I didn't flinch. I didn't even breathe. "Yes," I said, simply. "I am." Harper turned to Camden. "You didn't tell me your sister founded Madava." Camden looked like he'd just been hit with a defibrillator. "What Sierra know? That must be a mistake." "My sister works in..." "What?" "No," Harper said, turning back to me, her voice calm but clipped. "Your sister is the co-founder and CEO of the most advanced healthcare communication platform on the market. We've been negotiating with her company for weeks at a valuation of over $200 million. Dead. Silence. It wasn't the number that stunned them. It was the realization that I wasn't who they thought I was, or maybe who they never bothered to find out. My mother's hand clutched her necklace. My father looked at me like he'd never seen me before. Camden stared, blank, processing. A relative leaned forward, suddenly eager. "You're really the CEO?" I nodded. "We started Madava in a garage. Now we serve over 300 hospitals." No one moved. Even the waitstaff hesitated before continuing service. For a moment, I watched them, my family, grapple with the idea that the girl they'd once written off had been quietly building an empire. But that moment wasn't revenge. It was release. Because for the first time, they were seeing me. Not the version they'd wanted, but the one I actually became. And the truth I never needed them to. But let me take you back, because that moment didn't come from nowhere. It came from a lifetime of being underestimated. From childhood dinners where success was served in applause for Camden and polite glances for me. My father, the world-renowned heart surgeon, would ask Camden about his advanced science projects, his rotations, his scholarship interviews. When the spotlight fell on me briefly, I would scramble to offer something. I taught myself. Python this week, I'd say, proud hopeful. "That's cute," my mother would say, not looking up from her wine. "But you really should refocus on pre-law. That's more practical." Practical. That word was a cage. At 16, I built a hospital scheduling app for a school fundraiser. When the coordinator called my parents to praise my work, my mom replied, "Yes, but we're hoping she'll choose something more sustainable, like administration." Sustainable, as if ambition outside their blueprint was fragile. As if my dreams weren't real unless they fit inside their box. Once I slipped a printed copy of my code under my dad's newspaper at breakfast. He pushed it aside without a glance, reached for his coffee, didn't even ask what it was. That silence. It hurt more than any insult, and by the time Camden got into med school, they threw a huge party. I had just qualified for the state tech finals that same week. My mom said, "Maybe next time, sweetie. We've already planned everything for your brother." I went to the finals alone. I won. First place. Came home with a trophy. No one asked how it went. They were too busy beaming at Camden's Johns Hopkins acceptance letter. That night, I placed the trophy in my closet, and I made a promise. I wouldn't beg for attention. I'd build something so undeniable it would speak for itself. And that's exactly what I did. But the story doesn't end at the dinner table, because the real power wasn't in their shock. It was in how I built it without them ever knowing. Growing up in the Langford household meant you lived under a microscope, one calibrated for perfection, not passion, not curiosity, just performance, neatly measured, consistently approved. My father, Dr. Graham Langford, always said success was simple. Follow the blueprint, check every box, and stay the course. That course, Ivy League white coat, courtrooms or capital firms. Anything less was potential wasted. My mother, Eleanor, was an attorney who could win a case with a single raised eyebrow. At home, her cross-examinations were more subtle, but no less devastating. I still remember how she looked when I told her I was skipping pre-law. A pause, a sip of wine, and then calmly, "So you're throwing away your future." But it wasn't the future I was throwing away, it was theirs, because the more they pushed, the more I knew I couldn't follow their path. Not without losing myself. At 16, I had a taste of what I wanted, that hospital scheduling app. It wasn't just a school project, it was a window into something real, something that lit me up. When I tried to explain how it worked, my mom blinked, then replied, "That's nice, but let's not waste time on hobbies. You'll need a strong GPA to transfer into pre-law." Every spark I had, they tried to redirect. Like passion was dangerous, like dreams outside their comfort zone were threats. By the time I hit 17, I realized they didn't see me as a person with vision. I was a project, a deviation, something to correct. Camden. He was the golden boy, every report card pinned on the fridge, every award celebrated with dinners and speeches. When he shadowed surgeons at 17, my parents introduced him at parties as our future doctor. When I built an internal database for the school's volunteer program, I got a nod and a "that's useful," not even a second glance. It wasn't just about favoritism, it was about fit. Camden fit their narrative. I didn't. So I stopped trying to be the version of me they wanted, and I started preparing to become the version they'd never see coming. I applied to a small but highly ranked tech school far from Boston, one they couldn't pronounce without Googling. It was deliberate. I wanted distance, not just physical, but emotional. I needed a place where I wasn't Camden's sister or Eleanor's disappointment. And in that space, finally, I could breathe. At school, I wasn't weird for loving code. I was respected for it. My classmates didn't ask why I didn't want to be a lawyer. They asked for help debugging. That's where I met Maya Sterling. She was sharp-edged brilliance with a wicked sense of humor and zero tolerance for BS. We met in a data architecture class when we both challenged the professor's logic during the same lecture. After class, we laughed like old friends. We'd found our people in each other. Late-night coffee-fueled coding sessions became the norm, not for grades, for the thrill of building, creating, fixing what was broken in the world with nothing but logic and stubborn hope. Madava was born in that chaos. At first, it was just a sketch on a napkin. An idea, a better communication tool for hospitals, a way to prevent the deadly disconnects we'd both seen too often. Maya had lost her uncle to a medication error. I had watched my own grandmother get misdiagnosed 3 times. We knew the system was broken, and we believed we could fix one small part of it. While other students lined up for summer internships, we huddled in Maya's parents' garage laptops, open, surrounded by wires and takeout containers, fueled by Thai food and faith. Her parents' saints. They brought snacks, asked about our progress, offered to help us file our LLC papers when we were ready. They believed in us before there was anything to believe in. My parents, meanwhile, still thought I was freelancing in IT. It was easier to let them think that. Because every time I tried to explain Madava, their eyes glazed over. The day we got our first client, a small hospital network in Indiana, I called home. My mom cut me off halfway through and asked if I'd applied for that receptionist role she sent me. That's when I stopped calling. Instead, I poured everything into the build. Madava evolved fast. The prototype became a pilot. The pilot became a system. We pitched to angel investors, hired a dropout genius from MIT to handle backend, bartered website design to cover rent. Bit by bit, brick by brick, we were building something real. And the irony. By the time we hit 100,000 users, my parents still thought I was between roles. I remember opening their holiday newsletter that year. Camden had just completed his second residency. Sierra is exploring opportunities in tech, it read. That was the year we raised our first $3 million. I didn't correct them. It wasn't out of spite. It was protection, because Madava was sacred. It was the only thing I'd ever built that wasn't up for debate, and I didn't want their approval bruising its purity. Success in silence had become my specialty. But even silent success leaves footprints, and I should have known someone would eventually follow them, especially someone like Harper. The day her email hit my inbox, I reread it 4 times. Polite, strategic, curious. She was feeling us out, talking about mission alignment potential synergy, but all I saw was her name, Harper Carelli. Soon to be Harper Langford, Camden's fiancée. The moment I connected the dots, I felt a ripple of something deep, like the universe was finally syncing 2 timelines that had been running parallel too long. I didn't tell Maya, or our lead engineer, or anyone. I just waited, because I knew the moment was coming, and when it did, I wouldn't need to say a word, because I had already spoken through every line of code, every sleepless night, every quiet win. I didn't build Madava to prove them wrong. But the day they found out, they had no choice but to see me. They thought I was between jobs. They had no idea I was signing contracts worth 7 figures before my 30th birthday. Madava wasn't just a startup, it was a movement, a rebellion, a declaration that 2 women in a garage could disrupt the most bloated, outdated corner of American infrastructure, healthcare communication. We started with nothing but late nights and an idea. By junior year, we had a working prototype, clunky, unstable, but full of promise. A professor who believed in us introduced us to Dr. Simone Kwan, an administrator at a mid-sized hospital in Chicago, who took one look at our demo and said, "This could save lives." That first contract, it felt like winning a war. We celebrated with supermarket cupcakes and sparkling water. I called my parents that night not to brag, but because I thought maybe this one would count. My mom's response, "Just make sure you don't neglect your backup plan." So I stopped calling, because what do when your family only sees value in titles? They understand you build in silence. You let the results speak. After graduation, Maya and I moved into a shoebox apartment in Chicago's South Loop. Rent was $2,400. Our bank account had $912. We offered to redesign our landlord's construction website in exchange for 2 months of grace. He agreed. That was the kind of hustle we lived on. 18-hour days, ramen, borrowed Wi-Fi from the bookstore across the street. Every bug we fixed felt like chipping away at a wall no one else believed we could break. The first year we landed 3 hospitals. The second, we landed 20. By the third, we were in talks with a regional provider, our first real whale. The pitch took weeks. I wore the same black blazer to every meeting. We practiced demos in the mirror, wrote code on the bus. And when we landed it, I didn't tell my parents. Not when we hit 100,000 users. Not when TechScope called us the silent disruptors. Not when we raised $3 million in seed funding. I had learned by then recognition from them came with caveats. They would smile and say they were proud, but only if I played their game. Only if I earned their love in their language. But I had built my own language, and the industry was listening. Investors flew in from San Francisco just to see our dashboard. Medical staff gave testimonials about lives saved errors, prevented surgeries rescheduled in real time because of our tool. We hired our 10th employee, then our 30th. Maya took over operations. I focused on partnerships and innovation. We moved into a real office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a coffee machine that cost more than my college tuition. And through it all, silence from Boston. Except for the occasional Christmas card with "Hope you're finding your way" scribbled at the bottom. Camden was now a chief resident. My parents' annual letter read like an awards brochure. "Camden has been published again. We're so proud." For me, Sierra is pursuing tech endeavors. It stung. Of course it did. I was still human. But I'd taught myself to metabolize disappointment. Because what we were building, it mattered. It had weight. It had impact. And I didn't need applause to keep going. Then came the day everything shifted. I was in the office nursing my third coffee when I saw the subject line, "Inquiry, Strategic Alignment Opportunity, Horizon Health Tech," the sender Harper Carrills. I stared at her name for a long moment, almost laughing. I'd seen it before, on Camden's Instagram, on the party invitations, on the family group texts I usually ignored, Camden's Fiancée, and now Horizon Health Tech's Director of Strategic Acquisitions. Her email was smooth polished, a masterclass in corporate curiosity. She didn't mention Madava by name, just that her team was scouting solutions that reflect a deep understanding of real-time interdepartmental healthcare communication. But I knew what that meant. She was circling, and she didn't know who I was. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I Googled her, watched her keynote from a health tech conference, listened to her podcast interview about finding mission-driven founders. She was poised, brilliant, everything my mother had ever hoped I'd become if only I'd stayed within the lines. I kept her email unread for days. And then, the dinner invitation arrived. Camden and Harper's engagement celebration at Blue Bridge, formal, family only, I RSVP'd. Yes. Because by then I could feel it, the moment was approaching. Not a reckoning, not a revenge, a revelation. For years I dreamed of the day they would see me. And now, without me lifting a single finger, they were about to. The week leading up to the dinner, my mother called 3 times. "Wear something elegant," she reminded. "Harper's family is very polished. Translation, don't embarrass us." I said nothing, just nodded, made a mental note, and chose my outfit with precision. Black silk, tailored, no frills, no apology. I didn't wear it to impress. I wore it like armor. Because I wasn't coming to be seen. I was coming as someone who already knew her worth. When I arrived at Blue Bridge, the hostess smiled as if I belonged there. I walked past walls of glass, past hushed conversations and glittering chandeliers. Camden greeted me with that same easy charm he'd always had. "Liv, glad you made it," he said, kissing my cheek. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, meaning it more than he knew. And then I met Harper for real. She was everything you'd expect from someone in her position. Immaculately dressed, confident without arrogance. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine. She didn't recognize me, not yet, and I didn't push. Dinner unfolded like every Langford event, rehearsed praise for Camden, a spotlight I used to resent, until Harper paused, her brow furrowed, her head tilted. "Langford? Wait, you're Sierra Langford," Camden chuckled. "Of course, she's my sister." But Harper didn't laugh. She stared. Then came the moment everything changed. The air shifted, suddenly tense, brittle. Harper's eyes locked on mine. Something flickered behind them. Realization, maybe disbelief. "You're not Sierra Langford of Madava?" she asked. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. "Yes," I said, voice calm, steady. "I am." She looked from me to Camden and back again, stunned. Her expression morphed from curiosity to recognition to something dangerously close to awe. "You didn't tell me your sister founded Madava," she said, her voice tight, controlled. Camden's fork hovered mid-air. "Wait, what, Sierra? My sister doesn't run companies. She's in IT, or between jobs. Something like that." "No?" Harper replied, her voice gaining weight. "Your sister is the co-founder and CEO of one of the most innovative healthcare communication platforms in the country. We've been in acquisition talks with her company for 6 weeks, at a valuation north of $200 million. Dead silence, the kind that swallows rooms whole. I could feel it, the collective intake of breath, the neurons firing behind every frozen stare. My mother's lips parted slightly, her wine glass trembling in her fingers. My father looked at me like I had just shape-shifted. My cousin dropped her phone. And Camden? Camden looked broken. He stared at me like the walls of the reality he had grown up in had just cracked open. "Sierra," he whispered. "That's not... Are you serious?" I didn't break eye contact. "We started in a garage. Now we're in 300 hospitals nationwide. That's Madava." Harper leaned forward slightly, her voice softer now. "I thought your founder used a pseudonym. The tech community always called you a ghost. Never on press tours, never at expos, no LinkedIn profile, no headshots." "That was intentional," I said. "We wanted the product to speak louder than the people behind it." My father cleared his throat as if attempting to retake control of the narrative. "Well," he began, voice quivering, "I always knew she had potential with computers. I told colleagues years ago she had something brewing." I smiled at him, but there was no warmth behind it. Just silence, the kind I'd become fluent in. My mother, recovering her composure, smiled faintly. "Sierra, darling, you've always had a spark. I remember you tinkering with that school website years ago. We're so proud." And just like that, they tried to rewrite the story, tried to claim the victory without ever acknowledging the war. I didn't correct them, not because I agreed, but because I didn't need to. Let them spin it however made them feel safe. I had already won. Still, the dinner pressed on awkward now. Where once I was invisible, now I was magnetic. Cousins who hadn't said 2 words to me in years leaned in with, "So what do you invest in?" My uncle asked if I could review his son's resume. It was laughable. It was exhausting. And it was expected. The only one who didn't pretend was Camden. He didn't speak for most of the second half of dinner. He just sat there, sometimes looking at me, sometimes looking past me. After dessert, Harper pulled me aside. We stood near the panoramic window, Chicago's skyline glittering behind us like 1,000 secrets. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to put you on the spot." "You didn't," I replied. That moment was always going to happen. She hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth. Your platform saved a patient in our hospital last month. Our analysts keep quoting your systems like scripture. Now I understand why. You built something real." I looked at her, this poised, polished woman who would soon be part of my family, whether I wanted her to be or not. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. Because unlike the others at that table, Harper didn't try to own my story. She just saw it. Later that night, as I walked back to my car, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel anything that could be packaged neatly. I just felt done. For years, I thought I wanted that moment, thought I wanted them to finally see me. But now that they had, it didn't change a thing. Because I hadn't built Madava for them. I'd built it for every patient misdiagnosed, for every nurse buried in paperwork, for every doctor cursing outdated systems, and for me. For the girl who once slipped code under her father's newspaper, praying he'd care. Now I was the one who decided who got to see me, and who never would again. But then, the next morning came. And with it, my mother's text, 5 words that cracked open a door I'd long since closed. We need to talk. Brunch. The text came at 7:42 a.m. Sharp, Mom, we need to talk. Brunch tomorrow, Drake Hotel, 11 a.m. 2 hours later, my father chimed in. Dad, proud of you. Let's catch up soon. By lunchtime, Camden had finally sent his own message. Camden. Why didn't you tell me? I stared at that one the longest. Why didn't I tell him? Because I didn't want to need their validation. Because I wasn't sure which would hurt more, being dismissed again or being embraced only after I'd made it. But I said yes to brunch. Because some things finally needed to be said. When I arrived at the Drake, they were already seated, dressed like they were attending a board meeting rather than brunch with their daughter. My mother wore a pearl-strung blouse. My father had chosen his most formal weekend blazer. It was like my success now required a new kind of costume from them, something that matched the version of me they'd just discovered. Sierra, my father said, rising halfway from his chair, offering an awkward hug. You look well. My mother didn't waste a second. Darling, I've been reading everything. The innovation awards, the growth stats, the investment rounds. It's remarkable. She paused. But why didn't you share any of it with us? I took my time folding the napkin across my lap, not to delay, but to ground myself. Because this conversation wasn't about facts. It was about fractures. The last time I tried, I said calmly, you told me I should apply for a receptionist job, that I needed a backup plan. That's not fair. My father cut in, voice defensive. We were trying to help. It was never meant to be dismissive. No, I said, locking eyes with him. You were trying to fix something that wasn't broken. My mother stiffened slightly. We just didn't understand. Sierra, the tech world moves so fast it felt unstable. And medicine doesn't, I asked. Law doesn't. Your worlds have rules, yes. But mine has vision. That's what scared you, he sighed. You're clearly brilliant. We always knew that. No, I said. You knew what you wanted me to be. That's not the same as knowing who I am. The waiter brought coffee, then a reprieve, temporary and welcome. I stirred in cream slowly, using the pause to keep the heat in my chest from boiling over. I spent years building something I loved, I said. And every time I tried to tell you, it felt like screaming into a storm. So eventually, I stopped trying. My mother's voice softened. We thought you were lost. I wasn't, I replied. I just wasn't yours to direct anymore. The silence that followed was fragile, thin glass, stretched too tight. But it held. My father leaned forward. We love you. I know, I said. But love without respect doesn't feel like love. And for a moment, my father looked scared. Not angry, not indignant, scared. Like a man who had spent his whole life being right and was for the first time afraid he might have been wrong. The rest of brunch passed more gently. There were fewer assumptions, more questions, honest ones. They asked about Maya, about our first pitch, about that awful apartment in South Loop where we bartered rent with web design. My mother even admitted she had tried reading a blog on startup culture but didn't understand most of the acronyms. It was the most vulnerable I'd seen her in years. Before we left, my father said something that stayed with me. We never meant to make you feel small. You didn't mean to, I said. But you did, and that's the part I've had to work through. He nodded slowly. I'm glad you worked through it, even if it wasn't with us. There were no hugs at the end, no tearful epiphanies or grand proclamations, just a mutual decision to meet for dinner next week. It was a start, but what I didn't expect was Camden. 3 nights later, he showed up at my apartment with a bottle of Cabernet and a white box from a bakery. I tried baking, he said, sheepish. It went badly. So I bought backups. I smiled. Classic you. We sat on the floor, backs against the couch like we used to as kids. The Chicago skyline shimmered outside my window. The quiet was companionable for once. I need to say this, Camden began. No preamble, just truth. I'm sorry. I looked at him, surprised by the directness. I believed what Mom and Dad believed he said, that you were floundering, that you'd missed your shot. But you weren't lost. You were building something we didn't understand. I never asked. That's on me. You weren't the only one, I said. But I'm the only one here right now." He raised his glass to the black sheep. I clinked mine against his, to the sheep that built an empire. We laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. That moment, it mattered more than any valuation, any article, any accolade, because it wasn't about being admired. It was about finally being seen. 6 months later, the world around me had changed, but not in the way I once dreamed it would. Yes, the Horizon Health Tech acquisition went through. Medava became part of one of the largest healthcare tech portfolios in the world. Maya was promoted to Global Strategy Director, and I accepted the role of Head of Innovation. My new office overlooked the Chicago River glass walls shimmering with city light, the kind of view I used to press my forehead against on bus rides, imagining one day I'd belong there. Now I did. But the real transformation wasn't in real estate or titles. It was in my mother texting me a screenshot of a Forbes article titled 25 Women Reshaping Digital Healthcare and asking, "Have you met her? She reminds me of you." It was my father sitting through a full product demo with my team, not to correct, but to understand. Not every detail landed, but he nodded anyway, because this time he knew it mattered. It was Camden, mentioning in passing that he quoted one of my white papers during a Grand Rounds lecture, then texting they asked who wrote it. I told them, my sister, and it was me. No longer shrinking, no longer hiding. I started hosting monthly dinners for young women in STEM mentorship nights over pizza and whiteboard doodles. I told them everything I wish someone had told me at 19, that even when no one claps for your work, it still matters. That visibility isn't the same as validation, that there's power in being underestimated if you know how to alchemize it. One night, a high school student I'd been mentoring nervously asked me, "Do you ever wish your family had believed in you sooner?" I paused, thinking. The truth was, sometimes, yes, it would have made things easier, smoother, but it might have also made me softer. So I said, there's power in building alone. It forces you to believe in yourself before anyone else does, and once you have that, no one can take it from you. She nodded, not fully getting it yet. But one day she would. Because that's the truth, no one tells you about conviction, it outlasts applause. Recognition is sweet, but it fades. Conviction stays. And that's what I was really chasing all along. That night, I stood by the window of my new office, the skyline buzzing beneath me like circuitry. My reflection stared back, older, now calmer. The girl who once tucked a printout of her code beneath her father's newspaper was gone. In her place stood a woman who had proven herself right, not to them, to herself, and that was everything. Share your story in the comments. Have you ever had to build in silence just to be heard? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and send this to someone who needs the reminder you don't need their permission to become who you were meant to be.